Hi everyone, thank you for joining in for the next episode of AI Talks, where we'll get CEO's perspective on scaling AI through skilling and reskilling. Handing over to Hemang.
Hello all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us today for yet another AI Talk series. One of the most valuable assets for any organization are their employees. And with such technological advancement, it is very imperative for every individual to upskill and reskill. And at the same time, for employers to refactor their employees to stay relevant. And that is a topic which I want to discuss today in this talk series about reskilling, upskilling, and refactoring. I'm Hemang Naik, Global Head for Solution and Offering with AI Competency in Tech Mahindra. I have two esteemed panelists with me today. Gopal Devanahalli, he's the CEO for, he's a CEO at Manipal Education Americas. He has abundance of experience in digital transformation, especially in healthcare and education sector. I also have my colleague and mentor, Hasit Trivedi. He's a CTO for digital transformation at Tech Mahindra, and he's also a global head for AI competency at Tech Mahindra. Gopal, my first question for you. And so tell us about the Manipal group a little more, and also your experience in using AI at Manipal group.
Sure. Thanks, Hemang. Thanks for having me on this talk. Excited to be here today. So Manipal group is into broadly three big areas. We are a large healthcare company in India. In fact, we have the second largest chain of hospitals in India. That's one business. The second thing is that we are into health insurance. We have Manipal Cigna, which is a large private insurance company. And then the third big thing is education. In education, as you might know, we have got three large universities in India, including the famous, which is the Manipal University. But apart from that, we have universities outside of India. We have colleges outside of India. So we are a lot into higher education. We are also a lot into skilling, especially at senior levels. After people come into the workforce, we do a lot of skilling in IT and other areas. We have our edtech company called Unext, which is one of the largest online degree awarding company in India. So in education, we are doing a lot of interesting things in this space. So these are the three broad areas that we have. Now, to talk a little bit about AI and machine learning in the Manipal group, from my experiences, I've been with them since 2014. We've done a few experiments both in healthcare and education, and we've seen a lot of change happening, especially in the last 2-3 years. And one, as a user of AI and machine learning, but also we are one of the parts of the ecosystem, because we do a lot of training in AI and machine learning, which I'll talk about later. But initially, to answer your question, our experiences in using AI and machine learning. So in healthcare, there's a huge scope. I was there for the first 2 years when I was in the Manipal group in 2014 to 16. We looked at it in broadly three areas. One is directly in the clinical side, which is the toughest. How can AI and machine learning help in the clinical side? The second thing is in what can we do from a patient experience perspective? And the third thing is from an operations perspective. How can AI and machine learning help in that? So from the clinical side, we did a few experiments. In fact, we were one of the first hospital chains to do a pilot using Watson for oncology. Watson for oncology was AI which was trained by a leading cancer hospital called Memorial Sloan Kettering. So they had been putting in data for a long period of time and trained the system for that. So the whole idea was that patient attributes can be entered into the Watson system by the doctor or by a doctor's attender as the patient is speaking to them. Various, history of the patient, of course, what is the diagnosis which has happened. For example, if there was an MRI, the details of that. So all that gets entered, and then Watson of oncology actually comes up with a treatment option plan based on what it has seen with similar patients in Memorial Sloan Kettering. So that is the whole idea. And the idea about this was that this is not going to replace doctors. So that is not the idea, but it'll enable the doctors to scale. So two things we were trying to do. So can the patient, it'll give the ability for the doctor to have a discussion with the patient about the latest treatment options possible, based on a lot of research, similar cases that have been seen around the world. And the second is another interesting thing from our perspective. We obviously have hospitals only in certain cities. Now, if a patient wants to get a second opinion from a city where Manipal is not there, then they can send those details online. We enter into the system and we can give them a second opinion. So that was the whole idea. It was early stages, I would say. Watson also has, gone through a lot of changes. So I think it was a good experiment, but at that time, the timing was still not right for this to really scale. In my view, in the last 2-3 years, there's a lot of opportunity in healthcare that is coming up. You're seeing a lot of startups in India trying to do things. For example, there's a lot of opportunity in radiology. A lot of images we have of patients, X-rays and MRIs and CTs. So we could look at, based on those images, train a system to, again, not replace a radiologist, but help the radiologist to be more efficient in the way they do things. Just to give you an idea, I forgot to mention this, but we also have one of the largest diagnostic chains in India in a public-private partnership. So we've installed CT and MRI machines in Haryana's various hospitals, district hospitals, in Jharkhand's district hospitals. So we are working with the government there to scan patients and give them treatment stuff. So again, there's a potential to use machine learning and AI to look at these images and help the radiologist to scale. So that's just another example of where in healthcare it can come on the clinical side. But quickly moving on the patient experience side, another experiment which we did was in terms of patient, we used to collect feedback not only from outpatients, but from inpatients also. The moment somebody gets admitted to the hospital, within 24 hours, a patient coordinator takes their feedback. Usually the patient doesn't give it, but the attender, a family member gives the feedback. All this was getting captured. And we were, tracking based on this, what were the exercise to see whether there's any predictability in the NPS score based on the feedback that happens in the first 24 hours. And finally, of course, we take the feedback when they get discharged, right? So that's when the NPS is captured. So we looked at that, and based on that, we created a kind of a classification system where we said, based on certain attributes which were captured in the first 24 hours, if the likelihood of the NPS score is going to be poor, an alert would go to the patient coordinator immediately, saying that this person doesn't seem to be happy, you better go and do an intervention. So that was another experiment that we tried to do. So even in patient experience, there is a possibility to use things like machine learning and AI. And of course, in operations, one of the biggest things in hospitals is how do you improve the utilization of the assets, whether it's the operation theater, whether it's the beds, for example, right? So how do you therefore discharge patients quickly? That's typically in our hospitals, discharge can take 8 hours, 9 hours, because there are third parties involved, there's private insurance involved. So how do you cut that whole thing properly? There are many doctors involved who have to give a discharge release. So all that we were trying to improve using, again, algorithms based on what we've seen in the past. That's a very quick examples of what we did in healthcare. Similarly in education, and I can talk more about it, but we've seen similar things in student outcomes. So we captured, especially in an online learning, we captured what they're learning, how they're learning, their exam scores. So there is an ability to predict if a student is going to perform well or not. So that's possible on the student side. Then on the student experience side, again, you can capture a lot of things on how the experience can be improved. And finally, on an operations perspective, just to give you a very simple example, for example, for us in admissions, it takes 6 months for a student to first become a lead and finally join us. So we use Salesforce, and Salesforce has some AI capability called Einstein, which you might have heard of. So Einstein helps us predict whether a student is actually going to become an enrolled student or not at different interventions. We're able to see what the prediction is and then take actions based on that. So that's another example, simple example of how we are using AI on the education side. So I'll stop there. I think I spoke a lot, but
no, I think very fascinating, to be honest. And for a minute, I felt like a data scientist or somebody's talking has done some remarkable work in the space of science and whatnot, right? So I think some of the really great work which I heard from you. And I see now, how universities are doing a lot of work in the research in US. I just want to turn this a little bit. You talked about AI and using AI you use for clinical research, you use for educational side of it, where, how can you onboard faster and whatnot, right? How are you now moving more on the skill side of it, right? So how are you doing that more on what's the role of university and educational player for skilling of AI and digital mainly?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Hemang, and we've been again in this space for the last few years. And so we have, like I mentioned, an edtech company called Unext, right? So they are into skilling of in different ways. One is people who are like, say, Tech Mahindra or IBM or any of these large tech companies hire a lot of people fresh from college. So we train them in the first 3-4 months in different skill areas. One of the skill areas that has become obviously very popular of late is AI and machine learning. So that's one thing that we do. Second thing that we do is we offer courses directly to, again, people, working professionals who want to upskill, again, in AI and machine learning, right? So that's another thing that has happened in the last few years. The third thing we are doing is in our universities itself, how do we, incorporate the latest skills in teaching? And for example, we have one of the leading engineering colleges, which is Manipal Institute of Technology, MIT. So they're constantly looking at how do we bring in these skill sets in their courses that they're offering, right? So in all these three areas, we're working a lot in. And what we are seeing is that there's a huge demand for these skills. I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the choir out here. I think you all know this, but there's a huge, we've seen almost 100% growth in demand for reskilling working professionals in AI and machine learning. So that's something that we are seeing a big increase in. Our cohort sizes, 3-4 years back, we would probably be training 50 people. Now we are training 200, 300 people in one cohort. So that's the kind of growth that's been happening. And so there's a huge demand. So what we do, therefore, is we use, especially in the working professional reskilling, we have designed courses specifically for this. They're usually a hybrid course, a combination of online and instructor-led. So there's a lot of self-learning that can happen online, but the instructor would be able to guide the students or the person along with cases that they would work on to get their skills done. So that's a quick summary of what we're doing here.
And Hasit, from Tech Mahindra perspective, how is universities and educational players are helping enterprises? What's your view on that?
I think in overall supply chain of IT industry, I think university plays a very, very critical role. Correct? It's most of the service company. I'll represent service company which deals with a lot of people. Our largest companies are having 500,000 kind of people, and there are a lot of people, a lot of companies who are 100,000 plus people in this country, in India and across the world also. So certainly that scale at which we can get the people and the growth which we are seeing in industry, I think the universities are the only entity which can supply that volume of people. And certainly, I think this has been working for the last 3 decades, and the relationship between universities and the IT service industry has been phenomenal. I think they're working in a 2-in-a-box model, very collaborative approach. I think we at Tech Mahindra have tied up with multiple universities where we help designing the program, change the make the curriculum relevant, train the trainer to their professors and teachers, do the visiting faculty related programs also, and hire at early stage also. Correct. So I think, and it's a win-win for the institute as well as the student as well as the corporate. So I think the universities is a core to the scaling AI business in the industry. That is one thing. But I think one thing which is suddenly what has happened, that there is a spur of the demand, and there are 3 things which is driving the demand for the skill. One is that speed of change of technology has been phenomenal in last 3-4 years, and going ahead, it will not stop. I think it is very. Previously, the newer technology adoptions or coming was 5 to 7 years. Every 5 to 7 years, something will come. Now, every 2 years, something new is coming. Secondly, adoption is also is going with a very high speed. So it's not about the technology changing. The enterprises as well as the consumers facing company are adopting technology at a rapid pace. And last but not the least is the convergence of the technologies, correct? With the AI being glue across the technology. If you see a latest and greatest of metaverse, the AI is the center to it. If you talk about the little lower of IoT of the world, the newer breed of IoT, which is digital twins of the world, is powered by AI, or something in between, which is cloud, correct? The hyperscalers of the world. I think the AI is the center to the way how they manage their scale versus how they provide various software on demand, and AI plays a critical role on that thing. So I think these three things are creating huge demand pressure. But the good part is that corporates like TechM and the universities like Manipal's has been seen these kind of spots multiple times over the last 2-3 decades, and they are equipped, they are able to foresee things, and they're able to take advantage in their favor for their business, and as well as students and employments are being generated across the globe in this space. Despite the AI and automation technology, which people fear that may reduce the manpower need, on the contrary, it's creating a lot more job than what potentially effort reduction might be happening. The headcount reduction certainly is not happening, but effort reduction, whatever is happening, I think the multifold of the demand of job is pretty high. So I would say that it's a two-in-box model for the enterprise and universities, and they know how to play this thing and how to survive such kind of demand pressure, as well as the capturing the newer opportunity in this space.
Yeah, Hasit, I just want to add a couple of points to what you just said. One thing is that what we are seeing is that it's the training needs are not just on the algorithms or the applications, but also in terms of tools and platforms. So we're getting a lot of saying that train them on AWS, Azure, GCP. So it's not just the the algorithms, but on the tools. That's one thing we're seeing. The second thing we're seeing is that the consulting companies, tech cams and other companies, similar like all services companies, are also wanting the training to happen in the context of the business segment. So they're saying you just don't train them in broad skills, but can you also bring in a retail flavor? Can you bring in a fintech flavor into it, right? So that's another thing that we're seeing as a big thing. And there, I would again say that the universities cannot do that. So like what we have done, therefore, is of course we have the university base, but we have created another company which trains these short-term training programs, right? Where we can bring in academic, of course, from our university expertise, but we can also bring in business people, right? And combine that. So that's the space. So universities, of course, is a key player, but players like Unext are also very critical in this whole ecosystem because they can marry both the academic rigor plus the ability to bring in the industry expertise. So that's another thing that we need to keep in mind.
No, absolutely. I think you prompted me to add some more things. I think that the new age technologies are not the backend technologies; they are the business savvy technologies. It's not something which is mainframe going to clients or clients and to web, which are more technology centric technology. I would say, correct? It's a backend technology, I would say. But this technology, which is a AI. Or in future metaverse will come, it will be a business centric. It's like a business will decide how to consume and how to buy this technology. So buyer centers are changing, and that will change in the business mix of the industry also. More and more BPO organizations are growing faster than the technology business in most of the industry. Correct? Why? Because they have the better access to the buyer's ecosystem, business process know has become very important because these are disruptive technology, and no business wants to leave it to the technology people to transform their own business process. So I think what Gopal you said is very important. This technology is one thing, but putting in business context, vertical context is becoming very, very important. And that's where I think the real quality and scale is still a challenge, I would say. And yes, there is a struggle. Technology trainings are, of course, it's getting addressed very well, but in a contextualized training on a given industry, given business process, is still a big challenge. Yeah.
Thanks, Hasit and Gopal. And what I could hear is quickly summarize what you just said, right? We have been reskilling, upskilling employees for quite some time. However, the way it is to be done, right? And Gopal mentioned about the relevance of bringing a retail exposure, let's say, or metaverse, which Hasit mentioned about. BPO is growing faster as compared to because they understand the process faster. So I think some of those aspects have changed in the recent time in last few years. And that's probably the way forward as well as we go along. And metaverse, of course, is going to play a very critical role when it comes to how things are going to move forward from here. That brings me for one of the very other important aspects, and Hasid, I want to start with you here. With technologies like AI, which is ever changing, as you mentioned as well, it's not just about the skilling. It's also means that you have to refactor existing workforce, because somebody is working on, let's say, .NET or Java or something, and as we go along, probably there is a need for more AI specific skill set. So how do you see this aspects evolving?
Yeah, I think it's a multidimensional issue. One is, of course, skilling people on the newer technology. It can happen from a person who doesn't know the technology and does, or it can happen through reskilling of the legacy technology becoming this thing. But I think the more complex puzzle in this thing is that, see, that none of the technologies are necessarily taking over the human role 100%, correct? There is not a single job which, so it's a take over only partial job of human being, correct? So you leave away with the bandwidth, but the headcount is needed from the enterprise perspective, correct? Now it becomes challenge to write a new JDs to consume that remaining bandwidth, correct? So the role and designation and responsibility of the people will change, because they have spare bandwidth of say 20%, 30%, and how your new role will look like, correct? Because they cannot do the same work, because that piece of 20-30% work is taken over by machine, but their newer works are there. So that whole JD role responsibility change, and the pyramid will look very different, because the bottom end of the pyramid is being eaten up by the machines, and then you have the bandwidth availability at a even bottom level also, and then you have newer roles getting created, correct? So that is the one is the technology training. Other is that across the spectrum of the business process, the pyramid, role definitions, how to occupy the remaining bandwidth of the manpower, that is a refactoring and recalibration of the role structure and organization structure of the company. Third piece is that the newer kind of jobs which are getting created, correct? So the if you see the AI, most of the time it's a supervised learning, correct? You need a trainer or teacher to train this thing. So you have the data annotation as a very basic, that okay, somebody needs to train various kind of data, to the humanics, language experts, dialogue design experts, and arts, because arts are getting created using AI, the accent training to humanoids. So whole bunch of trainers across the spectrum, because you expect machine to mimic like human kind of behavior, correct? You expect if it is speaking, it should speak like a human. If you are exchanging dialogue over chatbot, you expect it has to be done in a manner which other side see as a human being. The experience cannot be diluted just because the other side is a machine. So this, from annotation to this trainer, so a whole bunch of teachers are needed across the spectrum, correct? So this is a new job which is getting created, because existing teachers know how to teach humans, but they don't know how to teach the machine, correct? So that whole skill of the teaching will be a new job. Various business analysts, various language experts, humanics, arts, and philosophies, all those things will get combined to give a human way of delivering digital experience to the humans, correct? So I think that is the three elements I said. Let me summarize again. One is that technology training of AI, which is first spectrum of the things, reskilling. Second is that across the business process, the pyramid and role structure will change, because there is a free up bandwidth and you have to occupy with the newer kind of work. So you have to be innovative in designing new roles. And third is that newer kind of roles which will come into picture, newer kind of trainers across the spectrum, which needs to train machines. So this will be the newer change, and enterprises are gearing up. I think it's not that I've never seen the enterprise being so agile the way they have been agile in the last 3-4 years, correct? So I think everybody is up to the mark, and that's why the adoptions are happening pretty fast.
Yeah, I just want to add something here, Hemant, if
Sure.
I may. The one of the things that I'm putting on my business hat perspective, right? One of the things is that the consumers of the data science AI solutions, right? So people like in our case in healthcare, the doctors, the people who run hospitals, etc. They also need to get some formal training, because there's a lack of trust and understanding of issues, right? There's a lot of hype about AI and machine learning, but how do you enable them? So for example, when we were trying to do the Watson for oncology piece, initially there was a lot of resistance from doctors saying, what does this mean? I mean, are you saying that the machine is going to tell something better than what I can tell? So we had to do a lot of training. So I think that element also is very critical. And there is a lot of misawareness of what AI and machine learning can do. So a lot of business training also needs to happen formally, and I think we should introduce that in so not just in tech colleges, therefore. So even in other kinds of curriculum, that element needs to come in. How AI can be used, what does it mean? How can you ensure there is no bias in algorithms, or all of that also, right? So all that ethical piece, all that also needs to come into terms of the training that we need to do.
Yeah, thanks, Gopal and Hasit. And I just want to add one more important point. Hasit mentioned about data annotation, image annotation, voice annotation, for training the models. There is one more business model which is coming up, which is a crowdsourcing, because I get tons of data in terms of, images or voice or documents, right? And I don't have a permanent skills available in my organization. So it means there are already a lot of crowdsourcing, which has already happened, which means that it's a new business avenue for freelancing, as well as for people to get into such kind of things. So I can sit at home and do certain work and can brought a lot of new jobs, which Hasid already mentioned about. So it's not just, while it will remove the bottom layer, but it's creating a new job in this means, right? Yeah. Now, Gopal, moving on, right? I have one question for you. You talked about university, Hasid, of course, talk about the large enterprises. But if I have to talk about university, startup, large enterprise, if I combine this whole force together, how does the perspective changes if I combine all of them together?
Yeah, no, I think what we are doing at Manipal, and I'm sure similarly other universities are doing very similar things, is bringing in, there's a huge startup ecosystem that's getting created in India, right? So how do we enable that? So we have, for example, an entrepreneurship cell in our universities. We encourage students to start working in different ideas right from first year, second year of college, right? And we give them an enabling environment in terms of training and technologies and other things. So that's something that, and then we invite speakers from different industries to come and talk to the students, give them examples. So that's something which is, I think, critical, that is going to happen. And then adding to the point that you just made about how this whole thing is enabled from a freelance perspective, there are companies which are approaching our students in our university saying, we can give you internships online from startups outside of India also. Right. So I'm just extending the point that you made. Right now, it's becoming, there are companies saying, look, we want you to look at this kind of a thing, do it from your college while you're studying, and do this piece of work. So it's an opportunity for the student, it's an opportunity for the startup which is outside of India. So those kinds of opportunities are coming in. So there's a huge thing that is possible. At the same time, they got to get grounded in certain things that they need to learn in a university. So you have to mix and match, right? It can't just be one thing and not the other, because then they'll lose the other key skills that they have to learn in university education. So there's a fine mix and match that we're all doing. We're all figuring it out, I would say. Entrepreneurship setups have been created in different universities of Manipal. I think we'll see more and more as to how this will all play out. And definitely AI machine learning is a very, very critical part of all these things, because like I think Hasit mentioned, it is becoming a part of every technology startup, that this is a core part of how those startups are scaling. So definitely, yes.
Thank you, Gopal. Hasit, what's your view on this one? How does the three come together?
I think the way I see is that the IT as an industry is becoming an ecosystem. Right? Earlier, it was a university and IT service industry. That was the only thing. Now, I think with the startup being an integral part of this whole supply chain, crowdsourcing also is getting mixed kind of thing, and newer models are getting mixed. So the university, large corporate enterprises like Tech Mahindra, startups, and the crowdsourcing is a part of the larger IT ecosystem which is getting formed, and the roles are getting interchanged among the things. The startups are getting incubated within the enterprises, startups are getting incubated within the universities. All kind of research are happening across the spectrum. It's a collaborative models are getting emerged. So I would say that it's a very healthy ecosystem is getting built. The trust deficit among the stakeholders are extremely minimal, and I think it's a very ecosystem which is coming because of the various kind of demand, correct? So you need a speed of innovation which is startup is providing to larger corporates, and thus you are taking them to the market and putting in your context and providing the market access as a company, and startup getting incubated by both, because the core research are happening in universities on technology research, but they need also people who experiment with the real business problem, correct? And the startup and the enterprise comes into picture. So this whole ecosystem is getting built, which is very healthy in nature, and it is providing the scalability to whole business. So I think it's a good way forward, which has been created in last few years, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Hasit. I just want to add one more point on top of it. So university helping scale the people, skilling, upskilling, that's where they are helping. Enterprise, when it comes to enterprise, scaling that to a larger scale, for very large organization, enterprise like Tech Mahindra helps, and startup ecosystem to solve the very niche problems, which is, very, very pointed solutions basically, and that all coming together can really scale up to a level which we have not seen before. So with that, I think, thank you so much. I think it's been a fantastic session. I always feel that such sessions are always, even though I know things, but I feel there's always something new which I get from experts like Gopal and Hasit. Thank you so much for joining us today. And the viewers.
Thanks, Gopal. Thanks for your time.
Inviting us. Yeah. Thanks.